This is Miss Esther Flashner of 306 Berry Hill Drive in Carrboro, North Carolina. Esther was born on August 13th, 1918, and served with the American Red Cross in the Pacific during World War II. My name is Commander Paul Zucker of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. I will be the interviewer and cameraman. Esther, do you want to tell us a little bit about when you were born and what you did in your early years?
I did what most people do in their early years. I went to the public schools and the public high school, and then I was admitted to Hunter College under a special decree. I didn't have the qualifications because I'd gone to the wrong high school and had taken a commercial course. My father thought a woman should be able to earn her own living, and when I wanted to get into Hunter, I found I couldn't, but they just fortunately ran this special program. They were trying to train teachers of commercial subjects, and I was admitted under that. So that's what I trained to be. And when I graduated in 1938...
That was in New York City?
In New York City, Hunter College. I qualified as a substitute teacher, and I did substitute teaching while I went to Columbia University for my master's. I was interested in pursuing an accounting career. I wanted my CPA, but in those days it was utterly impossible for a woman to get a job within accounting firms. They just, for reasons which were valid from their point of view, they wouldn't hire any women unless you had a relative who was in the business. There was no way you could do it. So I always said the Second World War started to help me become a CPA, because when all the men were drafted, suddenly I could get a job.
Well, that's a wonderful thing.
And I did get a job with a rather prestigious firm, but I got
That was what year now?
That was in 42 or 43. And after working for a while, this was in the midst of the war, and I was very much concerned, as everybody was, about what was happening to all the men, and the idea of being an accountant and worrying about the bottom line and whether a firm was making a profit when people were involved in a war. It just was something I found I couldn't bear, and I decided that I wanted to be involved in the war. I was very pacifically inclined, and therefore I wouldn't join the WACs and learn how to shoot.
What were the
WACs, the Women's Army Corps. They were the WACs or the WAFs, because they had to take military training, which I didn't want. I also wanted to be sure that I would go overseas, and the Red Cross seemed to be the best place to do it. So I joined, and I was accepted. And they asked me...
That year was... That the year
1944
was,
that I went, and I trained in Washington, and then they asked me where I wanted to be sent, and a very good friend of mine who had joined just before me had asked for Paris, had asked for China, and wound up in Paris, so I asked for Paris, and I was sent to the Philippines.
All right. And so you went to the Philippines, and what did you do there as a Red Cross volunteer?
Well, frankly, not very much. I landed in Manila, and then I was sent back after a while down to Hollandia, New Guinea, which at that time was sort of almost out of the war. The main action had gone, and I was hired as an accountant, so I did a lot of the clerical work in the office in New Guinea, and it was a very quiet life. And when people ask me, and I say I've been to New Guinea, actually I feel as though I'd never been there. What I was in was a piece of the United States superimposed upon the New Guinean landscape. We had no contact with any New Guineans. We were protected like crazy, and we just had a very insular life. And I was there when the war ended. And I must say, before the war, I sort of made a damn fool of myself, I guess, because we had no television. Of course, it didn't exist. There was no radio. We had very little contact with the real world, except for occasional radio reports. We didn't have radios ourselves, and rumors. And suddenly this rumor came around this day that the United States had dropped a bomb on a Japanese city and killed hundreds of thousands of people. And everybody was very excited about it. And I went around like an idiot saying to everybody, you will believe any rumor that comes along. Would our country do a thing like that? It couldn't have happened. I wish I had been right.
Okay. At the time that you were in New Guinea, though, you were there with the servicemen who were there as well. You were a woman, basically, among men. Do you remember any experiences and how you felt about that?
Well, it's the same way as I felt when I finally went on to the Philippines and to Korea. You were in a strange position because there were comparatively very few women. There were an enormous number of men. You were therefore wooed and solicited, but you never had a feeling that you were being, at least I didn't, that if I was being wooed or solicited, it was because anybody cared about me. I happened to be female, and there were so few of them that I had no feeling that people ever cared about me for myself, and that did affect relationships.
Did you meet anybody in the service at that time that you had any love affair? You had a love for or anything?
I met one man later on in Korea that I think I really cared about.
Okay. And so the Red Cross work you're saying that you did was mostly, for the most part, clerical and administrative, but you worked with other Red Cross women that were actually helping troops in hospitals?
And after a while I changed my job. I became a part of a Clubmobile. And what that was, there were two women assigned to this vehicle with a driver, and we would go around bringing donuts and coffee to men who were in isolated areas and had no place to go. I did this especially in Korea, and these really isolated because they had no contact with the natives there, and so the fact that there was this little Clubmobile with these two women coming up to serve them coffee was nectar, and the donuts were incredible. I never found out where the hell we got donuts in Korea, so that it was kind of a wanted activity, but honestly, when I think back at it, when I consider how much time and money was spent by the Army in taking care of the few women there, in protecting us, and seeing that we were kept out of harm's way, I'm not sure that the services which we gave were worth it all.
What kind of accommodation? You obviously had separate accommodations from the men. What were your accommodations?
Oh yeah, we were in installations. It depended, of course, upon where we were. When I was in New Guinea, I lived in a tent with a wooden floor, and I had to be sure that before I got into the tent at night, I made a lot of noise so that the rats would all get out first. In the Philippines, we lived in little buildings, usually two women to a room, fairly comfortable. And in Korea, we lived in Korean-built houses with tatami on the floor and on futons. There were no beds, but in all cases we were comfortable. I guess the most uncomfortable thing was the fact that for the first couple of months in Korea we had to brush our teeth in beer because the water was undrinkable and there wasn't enough fresh water to get around.
And did you eat with the military? Did you eat in their mess halls?
At times we did, very often we did, and the food was pretty awful, but that's what was. The big thing in our lives food-wise was when we would manage to get on a Navy ship, because the food there was so much better than anything that we got in the Army that the Navy was very popular.
Okay, and throughout your times there, did you come close to any action at all that put you close to a front?
Outside of the fact that of our trip overseas, which we made in convoy, it took 36 days to get from where we left in California to Manila, and there were occasional reports of bombings close by, but outside of that, I never felt that I was in any personal danger. We were very well protected. And then, of course, after the war ended, most of that was over anyway.
Yes, okay. So you stayed, you went in 44, and when did you leave?
I left finally in November of 46 from Korea, because I went into Korea with the occupation troops, and I spent 11 months there.
And what you did was the donut and coffee lady in Korea?
In Korea, I was a donut and coffee lady exclusively. And for a while I was in Seoul, and then the most interesting part was when I was sent to southern Korea, and we, my partner Ethel Halverson and I serviced an army unit that had 4 or 5 bases, and we would go around from base to base with our little clubmobile.
At the time, this woman that you just mentioned, was this a friendship that you kept after the war you left?
This was indeed a friendship that I kept after the war, and that we still have. We saw her not too long ago. The women were very, very close. We were just a few of us, and we had a comradeship that was as warm and beautiful as anything I have ever had. We, there were a number of...
I'm sorry, Esther, we had to change film. Continue on with your story about your best friend.
Well, she is still now one of my best friends. She invited Marty and me to stop by in North Carolina on our way to Florida one day. I hadn't seen her in, I guess it was 50 years at that time, but we stopped by, and she was one of the reasons that charmed Marty so with North Carolina that we are now living there. She's a big factor. She married a physician at the Chapel Hill, North Carolina University Hospital. He has.
So after you left service, and not service, but you left the Red Cross at that time, and your friendship with her, you went back into the world in the 50s, and what did you do?
Well, I went, by that time I had, as soon as I got back, I was appointed to the high schools as a teacher, and I took the job, and took another exam and became a high school supervisor. And all along I had been teaching at Hunter College as an adjunct. I had been invited to come there right after I left, and in the early 70s, I was invited to come on the faculty as a full-time professor. But at that time, I needed my CPA, and I hadn't taken it because I just hadn't gotten around to it, and I didn't think I had sufficient experience. But one of my former students, who was had a very influential job, checked into the whole matter, saw that I got my experience. As a matter of fact, I was given an experience rating for my service in the Red Cross, which came as a big surprise. I got it the last week. They were closing the office, and I just happened to call at the right time, and the man says, "Tell me what I have to say, because you know about it and I don't." He wrote the letter. I went through the board of CPA examiners, and they accepted my credentials, so I took the exam and I passed it, and I got my CPA, which enabled me to take the job at Hunter College.
I didn't understand about what credit you got for the Red Cross. What was
well, you needed, in order to be eligible to sit for the CPA exam, you needed a year of accounting and auditing experience, public accounting and auditing experience. And I had left to go to the Red Cross before I had finished my year at Seidman and Seidman, and so I needed a few months, and this ex-student of mine helped me get certification from the Red Cross that the experience which I had gotten there while I was in New Guinea would qualify, and so I was permitted to sit for the exam.
You mentioned that I got New Guinea, you talked about, and you also talked about Korea, but there was something in between those two?
Well, after the war ended, I was sent from New Guinea back to the Philippines, and I spent a while in San Fernando, in Luzon, Upper Luzon.
Near Okinawa.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I had one day in Okinawa. I don't remember how that happened. I know I spent one night in Okinawa at Nahar, and the winds were blowing at 60 miles an hour, but that was only one night. And then I was asked that winter whether I would like to go to Korea, and I said yes, because I knew that if I said no, I would be sent there anyway. I'd never heard of Korea. It was Chosen because it had been occupied by the Japanese for 40 years, and the United States troops were sent in there as part of the end-of-war operations, because they were trying to liberate everything there, and they had no idea of what they were going to find when they got into Korea. So an enormous number of troops were sent in, and Red Cross and hospital people and all the adjuncts were sent in too. And as a matter of fact, there was practically no resistance, so the troops were just sitting there having very, very little to do, because they were able to send all the Japanese who had been occupying Korea back to Japan, and that was a very, very sad thing to watch. A refugee is a refugee, even if he's a Japanese refugee. Sure. And these people who didn't know where they were going, when they would get a train, when they would get a bus, how they would get back home, were in very sad shape.
And you went to Japan at that time as well?
No, I went to Japan. I stopped off in Japan on the way to Korea. That was the way to get there, and I spent 2 or 3 weeks there.
But during your time in Luzon and in the Philippines there, what were your feelings about the Japanese? I see you have some sympathy about them as refugees now, but at that moment, how did you feel about them?
They were the enemy, that's all. I had no contact with any of them. I never had any terribly strong feelings until I got to Japan, and then I felt very queasy being in Japan, because I felt that everybody around me really would just as soon slit my throat, even though the war was over then.
And you visited as a civilian many years later, 20 or 30 years later?
Well, that was one of the most, practically a unique experience that I had. I had gone to China as a tourist, very fortunately in 1978, when China was first opening up to ordinary people coming as tourists. And on the way home, since I was in the neighborhood, I figured I'd love to find the Korea that I had been to. And so I, all by myself, went into, got a plane and went into Seoul. And I registered at a big hotel, and I spent 3 or 4 days, and I discovered that Korea had been totally, but I mean totally, ruined during the Korean War. It was decimated. I could find no place that had existed when I was there. Our old hotel, the Sharanui, was gone. Not only was it gone, nobody had even ever heard about it. The only place I found was what we used to call the Duck Soup Palace, Duksu. That was still there. And then I decided that I wanted to go back and find Puyo, the place I had been stationed in. And so I rented a car, and I was going to leave that morning, and one of the young ladies at the hotel who spoke English came over to me and said, "You're going down into southern Korea?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm coming with you." I said, what do you mean? She said, you must be out of your mind. You're going to take a car by yourself and travel on these roads where there's no signs in English. Everything is in Korean. You don't know the road. You don't know where you're going. You won't find a person who speaks English once you leave Seoul. We're not going to let you go alone. I'm coming along. Oh, I was delighted. I said, fine. And she came along with me, and they were 4 of the saddest days of my life because she knew how to do it, and she looked and looked and looked, and she could not find the places that we had been in. They were gone. Cholera epidemics had wiped them out, and my little well-beloved towns were no more. So I came back.
So what I'm hearing is that out of your experiences in going over as part of the Red Cross to the Philippines and then to Korea and stopping in Japan, it gave you a little bit of confidence and wanderlust in being able to go back into these places and feel perfectly safe and adventurous in doing this.
Absolutely.
And so this has enhanced your life throughout your life. In other words, this is
absolutely. And I said, I think I may have mentioned that I had asked to go to Paris, and I wound up in the Philippines and New Guinea, and I think that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Paris I would have gotten to by myself, but Hollandia, New Guinea, and that, as you said, created the wanderlust in me, and I've been traveling ever since and loving it.
So that was one kind of activity that has influenced that. Was there anything else that out of your experiences in world and during the war that have changed your life or changed your outlook on life at all? Your feelings about war?
My feelings about war, well, they were pretty definite before. As I told you, one of the reasons I chose the Red Cross was because the idea of bearing arms is outside of my natural feeling. I'm very as close to being a pacifist as you can be. I feel as though the war against Germany could have been averted if we had acted a little, if politics had been a little better, but once it happened, there was no way out but to get rid of Hitler, and so therefore I reluctantly agree that that war had to be.
And what about the war against Japan then?
Well, they had bombed Pearl Harbor, and I just felt as though I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any the war, Germany and Japan became one to me, and it was just a war that I had to be involved in. As a matter of fact, I felt so strongly that for a while, any man I ever met who was of proper age, who for some reason or other was not in the war, I felt a little less respect for than for those people who had served.
So you went from that feeling to one of total pacifism now? Is that what you're saying?
Well, as I say, I'm as close to being a pacifist as you can be. I believe that one human being should not throw a bomb on another human being, and that's an absolute. And it's wrong. And if we do it and we think we have reason for doing it, it's still wrong.
Okay. We don't want to get into politics at this point, but
okay.
I wanted to understand how your experience at that time affected you today, and it affected you temporarily, but today you have changed your mind about what you saw from the time you were in the Philippines.
When I came back from Korea, I came back with stars in my eyes. I felt that the human being had learned something, that now we knew we'd have to find other ways of solving things. I became a United World Federalist. I believe in World Federation, and I thought it was going to happen. And the fact that we are farther away than ever for it makes me very hopeless about the future of the world.
So you have a belief now that World War II was of no value then, in looking back 50 years, 60 years?
I wouldn't say it was of no value, because it did get rid of Hitler, but it didn't accomplish positively what I had hoped it would accomplish, which was to teach people how to learn to live together.
Well, let us hope, Esther, that with your remaining years that we all get to see that. And
I hope so.
And we thank you for your patriotism that you showed in going off into the world of men during World War II and succeeding in coming out the strong individual and feminist that you are today. Thank you, Esther. Bye-bye.
Bye.